Dealing with Scottdale is not exactly an easy thing because there's a lot of stuff there. And this is one of those times that I have to remind myself that I am not doing an in-depth history of these places. What I'm doing is an historical survey of the area, around Westmoreland County, we'll say, which means I really can't get too much in depth about one specific place. I'm trying to do a survey of the area, and I'm not going to be spending a whole lot of time on Scottdale, although a person could probably write a book on the place. When we're talking about Scottdale, we're talking about something else that was there previous to Scottdale. Scottdale really didn't exist until about 1873. But prior to that, there was something there. It was a little country village. It was called Fountain Mills on Jacobs Creek. What to know about it is that usually it often happened that where there was a mill and a blacksmith shop, and in this case a distillery, very often a little village formed at that place. And you can see it, and I'll show a picture of it as it happened as it was mapped in 1867. But right now, we're just talking about it as the kind of the foundation of what became Scottdale. And looking at the business directory of the early place prior to Scottdale, you can see quite a number of people there, including a person who did the inspection of the distillery for the government. So there was, not just the little village, but there were the people in the farms around there that, were included in what was happening. And I should mention that the first mill there was built as a log cabin on Jacobs Creek in the year 1800. Since 1800, there have been mills there. And the one there, when the railroad came through in the 1870s, was the fourth mill. That was Kiefer's mill. And Kiefer's land eventually became known as Kiefertown. Decided would be a town once the railroad arrived. The big event for Scottsdale happened was the arrival of the Southwest Branch Railroad. And they named the town after the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. And I think it's time to shut this down, and we'll start to look at some pictures. Now we get to look at some pictures. The first picture we see is a very old map. This very old map goes back to 1857. Now up here is West Overton. And if you're looking for Scottdale down here, well, you don't see it because it's not there yet. We'll try to focus in a little bit here. This is the area that became Scottdale. You can see a J, L-O-U-C-K, Lauk. As time went on, that name be called with an S, L-O-U-C-K-S, Lauks. They owned a farm, a good bit of property around here. And they were not just friends of, but even in some ways related to the people up at West Overton. They were Mennonites, as were the Overholts. Now over here is the place that more or less began, the little village that became Fountain Mills. There was a sawmill, a grist mill, and a distillery here. Now we move on about 10 years. This is 1867. Here's West Overton up here. This down here now has a name on the map called Fountain Mills. And one thing I should point out is that this is in a section of Westmoreland County where Fayette County is right across the line. This is in the southern part of Westmoreland County. Jacobs Creek, which I'm pointing out, is the defining border between Westmoreland and Fayette counties. Now this is an enlarged section of this over here. Maybe I should even enlarge it a bit more to give an impression of actually what was there. This is Jacobs Creek coming down, and it was dammed up at this point. There was a cooper shop, a place to make barrels, and you might wonder why they were doing that, and I'll tell you. Because there was a grist mill and a distillery. A grist mill made flour. Flour was sold in barrels. And a distillery made liquor, which was also sold in barrels. You had a bonded warehouse up here where the liquor that was made was kept legally until it was aged a sufficient number of years. Right up here were the Loucks, L-O-U-C-K-S. And we move over to see, this is J.S. Loucks, among other people in the little community of Fountain Mills. The Loucks did not just have a little house, they had a farmstead. They had a lot of the property around here. To the point that when it came obvious that the railroad was coming through in 1872, it was just being built, but they knew that it would be coming through in this area north of this road, which was called Pittsburgh Road, and eventually became known as Pittsburgh Street in Scottdale. Jacob Loucks laid out lots up here, and not near as many as he should have, because he had no idea just how big a thing Scottdale would become. He eventually had to lay out more. Down here south of what became Pittsburgh Street, his brother Peter S. Loucks and his sister Catherine also laid out lots down here. And this is what became Scottdale. I might mention the family. These are the Loucks. When you look at them, immediately they give the impression of being religious people, and they were. They were Mennonites. This was Jacob S. Loucks, his wife, and their children. This is the way Scottdale developed. It was very heavily industrial. This was their homestead, their farmstead, right up here. It was still there in 1905 when that picture was taken. That is a much better picture of it. It has been preserved, and it is still there. This is called Locks Park, a picture taken in 1909 when there was festivities on July 4th of 1909. This is Locks Avenue. The Locks apparently named a street for themselves, and a lot of the better off people had homes along there. Now you see one of the older mills in the area. This was the old post office. You see it was called Fountain Mills. The original post office was over on the Fayette side. And when Scottdale was, legally announced, it became legal in 1874. The railroad had shown up in 1873. And at that time, the post office moved over to Scottdale on the Westmoreland County side. Keister had a mill on North Broadway in Scottdale. And I'm just putting this in to show you. This is Greensburg up here. These are railroads. This is Southwest Junction, showing you how the train on the Southwest branch would come down through Youngwood, Hunker, Tars, and all these places down to Scottdale on the way down to the coal and coke region of Fayette County. See, this is right up here, the end of Westmoreland County. And being on the road, the railroad where all the coal and coke came through, it was a very good place to be because industry developed right there. Now we're going to have another look at this. In the meantime, here's a recap just showing you Fountain Mills and the larger place where we see the southern boundary of Westmoreland County and the little place called Fountain Mills that became Scottdale. And once more, Slick and Shiny tongue-in-cheek productions have brought you a trip back to the days of yesteryear and see the world in which some of our ancestors lived. And that's about it for right now. Bye now.